All right. Good evening, everyone. Now, we have to cover one major chunk of part one of our paper one. After the post-Gupta age, that is the early medieval age. चालुक्यास एंड पल्लवास कंप्लीट नहीं हुआ था, कंप्लीट हो गया था ना. तो पोस्ट गुप्ता एज बोथ इन नॉर्थ एज वेल एज साउथ इंडिया वी हैव कवर्ड. अब अर्ली मेडिवल एज नेक्स्ट चंक हमें कवर करना है, within which some sub themes that we need to focus upon. First is the debate on Indian feudalism. Related to the debate on Indian feudalism are two other debates: the debate on demonetization during the early medieval age and theory of urban decay during the early medieval age. So different historians ने उनके ऊपर एक्सप्रेस है. We need to those our current position क्या है in debate, that also must know about. Next theme, the tripartite struggle, within which we are looking at the causes and consequences. Further, we will be taking a look at the cultural contributions of the three powers involved in the tripartite struggle. The Gurjar Pratiharas, Palas, and the Rashtrakutas. Another important theme that we need to cover is the Rajput period. Political system, economy, and the society. We also need to take a look at the Arab conquest of Sindh and its consequences. And finally, we need to study in detail the picture of India painted by Al-Biruni, who visited India in the early 11th century. Al-Biruni's India especially the social and educational aspects, cultural aspects of India as reflected in Al-Biruni's Kitabul Hind. ये themes हमें cover करनी. हाँ नहीं, medieval history अभी नहीं cover कर रहे हैं हम, ये early medieval period है. हाँ, origin of Rajput will also be political. Early medieval age is considered to be the transitional age between ancient and medieval India. Time period roughly 8th to 12th centuries. This is the accepted time period. However, for different themes ना हम इस time period के beyond भी जाएंगे. For some of these topics, processes may begin as early as the 5th or even 3rd century AD and may continue even up to the 14th century. For example, दिखते हैं, ठीक है. So this time period, this is only in. Now first, Indian feudalism. So when I use the word feudalism, what do you understand by it? क्या आता है दिमाग में, क्या पिक्चर आता है? लैंड ग्रांट्स आते हैं और इस तरह का सिनेरियो आता है. State within a state, sub-states, political fragmentation, disintegration, that you get to see. Weakening of central authority, emergence of landed military states. क्या आता है दिमाग में? Economically, what do you associate feudalism with? De-urbanization. What else? Decline of long distance trade, replacement of long distance trade with self-sufficient local village economies, estate system, serfdom, ये सब आता है. Socially speaking, progressive or regressive system, regressive restrictions are rising, etc. Right? क्या serfdom की नहीं, लेकिन all of these are things that are generally associated with. Before we talk about the debate surrounding feudalism, सबसे पहला काम क्या है कि एक पैरामीटर हमको सेट. Feudalism refers to a socio-economic and political system characterized by एक एक करके weak central authority, decentralization of the revenue, general and military administration, fragmentation of polity, the presence of hierarchical elements within the power structure the decline of trade and commerce, the decline of crafts production, the decline of urbanization, the decline of troops associated with secondary economic activities, the ruralization of the economy, the decline of the monetary system, the emergence of self-sufficient village economies, further rising restrictions on social mobility and physical mobility, the institution of serfdom, the growth of vicious beliefs and practices, the stagnation of science and education, and the rigid stratification of the society. ठीक है? These are the social aspects of feudalism. These are the economic aspects of feudalism. These are the political aspects of feudalism. Right na? Now, the concept of feudalism developed for the first time in Europe from the 17th century onwards. In which context? In the context of Indian history or in the context of European history? European history. In the context of European history, during which period? Ancient period, medieval period, or modern period? Medieval Europe, right? In the context of European history, during the medieval age, from the 7th to roughly the 14th century. Okay? Now, as per this early concept of European feudalism, it was interpreted as a purely political phenomenon characterized by the presence of a lord vassal relationship between the king and the various feudal elements, okay, wherein the king occupied the position of lord and the feudal elements acted as his vassals. The relationship between these two elements was reciprocal in nature. एक हाथ से देना, दूसरे हाथ से. What did the king, or what was the king expected to provide the feudal elements? Security and privileges. Such as titles to various lands, properties, hereditary ownership over these properties, the right to extract forced labor from people living on these lands, etc. Right? And in return, the king expected what? Loyalty and some services. In times of war, rendering of military service, for example, the discharge of administrative duties on behalf of the king by the vassals in the areas of their own jurisdiction. ठीक है, तो केवल एक लॉर्ड वैसल रिलेशन में इस रिलेशनशिप को इमेजिन किया गया था ड्यूरिंग द अर्ली पीरियड. इज दिस मच क्लियर? And this idea would remain unchanged till the early 20th century. Now, in the context of India, the same early European lord-vassal relationship was applied to the relationship of the Rajput rulers of Rajasthan and their subordinates by Colonel James Todd in the 19th century. Because when he observed the Rajput political system and society of the 19th century, he could clearly see the existence of this relationship, and therefore he felt that this relationship had been present in the region of Rajasthan from the very early period. Okay? So although he was studying Rajasthan of the 19th century, he felt that this lord-vassal relationship defined the nature of the relationship between the various political classes from the 10th century onwards, or even earlier, 8th century. ठीक है? तो यही सेम लॉर्ड वैसल रिलेशनशिप का जो फ्रेमवर्क था, दैट वाज अप्लाइड इन द कॉन्टेक्स्ट ऑफ इंडिया आल्सो इन द पीरियड फॉर द फर्स्ट टाइम बाय कर्नल जेम्स टॉड इन द 19th century. A paradigm shift came in the European understanding of feudalism in the early 20th century. During the 1920s and 1930s, a Belgian historian Henri Pirenne, he re-evaluated the history of Western Europe during the medieval ages and came up with a new framework for feudalism. अब इसने क्या किया? He linked feudalism to trade. And what kind of a relationship existed according to him? A direct relationship or an inverse relationship? An inverse relationship. जब ट्रेड ऊपर जाएगा तो फ्यूडलिज्म नीचे जाएगा, और जब फ्यूडलिज्म नीचे जाएगा और सॉरी ऊपर जाएगा तो ट्रेड ऑटोमेटिकली नीचे. ठीक है? इन एन inverse relation. According to him, the economic situation of ancient Europe was characterized by flourishing trade, flourishing cities, vibrant civilization, the expansion of the monetary system, and scientific growth. As such, इसके साथ क्या आएगा? Feudalism और large flourishing empires characterized by the expansion of the Roman Empire, and before that the Macedonian Empire of Alexander. ठीक है? However, this changed around the 7th century CE. क्या हुआ? With the Islamic expansion under the Umayyad Caliphate, much of North Africa, Spain, and the eastern Mediterranean coast came under Arab rule. This had shortly been preceded by the disintegration of the Western Roman Empire and both these things led to the collapse of the grand trade that connected Europe and the Mediterranean regions. What is going to happen as a result of the collapse of this grand trade? The rise of Feudalism. Feudalism is going to rise. So, if the collapse of the grand trade was the major factor behind the rise of feudalism, how then do you think would Pirenne have explained the decline of feudalism? Causal factor क्या है? Decline of trade, right? ट्रेड और फ्यूडलिज्म के बीच में इनवर्स रिलेशनशिप है. तो अब फ्यूडलिज्म के डिक्लाइन होने की बारी आई है, तो व्हाट इज द फैक्टर गोइंग टू बी? द रिवाइवल ऑफ ट्रेड. तो with the crusades from the 11th century onwards, the Arabs were pushed back from the Mediterranean, and hence trade was revived, resulting in a decline in feudalism from the 11th century onwards. ठीक है. However, ये मॉडल कहां पे अप्लाई किया गया था, कौन से पीरियड, कौन से रीजन की हिस्ट्री को एक्सप्लेन करने के लिए? यूरोपियन हिस्ट्री. इन द कॉन्टेक्स्ट ऑफ इंडियन हिस्ट्री, feudalism was never explained as a large socio-economic and political system. At best, it was simply a derivative of Colonel Todd's model. याद है वो क्या था? That it was simply a lord-vassal relationship. So, at various points in Indian historiography, feudalism had been mentioned in the Indian context, but it had never been elaborated. In Indian history writing, feudalism remained an underdeveloped concept. Till the 1950s. 1950s तक किसी ने भी इसको ढंग से एक्सपैंड करने की कोशिश नहीं. एंड which group of historians first tried to examine Indian feudalism as a socio-economic and political system? The Marxist historian. ठीक है. तो Marxist historians were the earliest to examine feudalism in the Indian context as a socio-economic and political system. And why did they do this? What was the urge for them to do this? No, because they wanted to challenge a stereotype that was embedded within Marxist history writing with respect to ईस्टर्न स्टडीज, ठीक है। तो मार्क्स who had interpreted the history of the world as a history of class struggle had rejected the Oriental systems as an exception to the framework of historical development to class struggle. In the context of Oriental systems, Marx had come up with an alternative explanation. He had called these systems being based on the Asiatic mode of production. Within this system, Marx postulated that all factors of production were owned either by the king or by the community. ठीक है? As a result, there was either perfect inequality or perfect equality. ठीक है? Now, in both scenarios, क्या classes का existence हो सकता है? नहीं हो सकता. ठीक है? So, if the society is perfectly unequal, that means there is only one landowner and the rest of the society consists of landless laborers only. Or if all the resources are evenly distributed among everybody, so class distinctions do not exist. So the Asiatic mode of production, according to Marx, was thus characterized by the absence of economic classes Okay, and since there are no classes, can there be class struggle? नहीं हो सकता है. ठीक है. So therefore, since the paradigm of class struggle is not applicable to the framework of Indian history, has Indian history ever experienced any change? No. Therefore, the Indian society as a subset of the Oriental society, that means the entire Asian society, was characterized as a changeless society by the father of Marxist historiography himself, Marx himself. Okay? And according to Marx, what was the main driving force for change in the Indian society? This would come only during the modern age. Colonialism was the main engine which brought about some radical changes in the India. पहले का सोसाइटी उसने डिस्क्राइब किया है कि चेंजलेस, टाइमलेस, स्टैग्नेंट सोसाइटी था. There was no change in the Indian history at all. ठीक है. Now, do you think that this is an accurate representation of Indian history? इज इंडियन हिस्ट्री कैरेक्टराइज्ड बाय द एब्सेंस ऑफ चेंज? नहीं है, हमने पूरा का पूरा हिस्टोरिकल डेवलपमेंट एंशिएंट, इट इज कैरेक्टराइज्ड बाय रिमार्केबल ट्रांसफॉर्मेशन थ्रू आउट द एजेस, जहां पे एक पीरियड और दूसरे पीरियड के सोशियो इकोनॉमिक एंड पॉलिटिकल चेंजेस के बीच में you have definite causal links, right? Therefore it is not a changeless society. As a result, the Indian Marxist historians challenged this paradigm of the Indian society being a changeless society, and this was the initial motivation behind the notion of Indian feudalism. Okay? And within this, the early lead was taken by the historian who is generally considered to be the father of the Indian Marxist, on D.D. Kosambi. Now, his ideas were not based on an empirical model. Rather, he had simply given a formula to explain the emergence of feudalism in India. According to him, Indian feudalism emerged as the result of a two-way process. Feudalism from above and feudalism from below. ये feudalism from above क्या है? It is the emergence of feudalism due to state action. And which particular state action do you think D.D. Kosambi would have attributed to the emergence of feudalism? बताओ. Making of land grants. And through these land grants, not only was land as an economic resource transferred to the beneficiaries, but also certain powers and privileges transferred, okay, such as the power to extract revenue, extract forced labor, some administrative duties, etc. were also transferred. And feudalism from below क्या process होता है? That with the development of the village economy, with the expansion of agriculture, are emergent groups not going to emerge in the rural landscape? तो अब गांव में भी रईस लोग emerge होने लग जाएंगे ना, right? And they are going to now insert themselves because of their economic and political power between themselves, between the peasants, the producing class, and the kings in a lord-vassal relationship, a hierarchical relationship. So this was explained by him in the form of the emergence of rural elites. ठीक है? However, not much empirical data was provided by D.D. Kosambi to support this formula. केवल एक फ्रेमवर्क दे दिया, उसके पीछे जो रिसर्च नेसेसरी होता है वो इन्होंने नहीं. This task fell to probably the historian who is best associated with Indian feudalism. इसकी बात कर रहे हैं हम R.S. शर्मा की. ठीक है? तो R.S. शर्मा ने क्या किया? He linked Indian feudalism to land grants and declining trade. ठीक है, but he ignored other factors responsible for feudalism. ठीक है, so he has partially borrowed the model of D.D. Kosambi, right? क्या बोला है? He has focused upon feudalism from above or below? Above, while ignoring feudalism from below. At the same time, he has also taken a leaf out of the book of Henri Pirenne, जो यूरोपियन फ्यूडलिज्म को एक्सप्लेन करने के लिए डिक्लाइनिंग ट्रेड के साथ इनवर्स रिलेशनशिप है, वही यहां पे भी बोरो किया गया है. He has also borrowed from Pirenne's model. Right? And how has he done this? कैसे किया है इन्होंने ये? He has said that with the decline of the Gupta Empire, what happened to India's overseas trade? It also declined. What was the result of this? Urban economy is going to rise or decline? Decline. There was a decline of the urban economy. And the economic center of weight is going to start shifting away from the cities towards the villages. So there was a rise in the rural economy. Now, with the declining urban economy and rise in the rural economy, although the general level of prosperity has remained the same, that has not necessarily declined, but the availability of metallic currency, उस पे क्या इफेक्ट पड़ा है? वो अब कम हो गया है. ठीक है, तो the availability of metallic currency has declined sharply, and thus the rulers are in search of an alternative method of paying their functionaries. कैसे पे करेंगे ये फंक्शनरीज को? टू लैंड ग्रांट्स. The rising rural economy along with the availability or declining availability of metallic currency is going to result in the proliferation of land grants. Which type of land grants do you think are going to start rising now? Secular grants or religious grants? Secular grants. And hence you see that from the 10th century onwards, grants being made to military officials are far larger in number as compared to the grants being made to the priestly class or to temples. Okay? Although those were already there and they were continuing, the number of religious grants also continued to grow, but the number of secular grants was now much larger. Is this clear? The rising land grants is going to be accompanied by the decentralization of political authority. And finally, political fragmentation. ठीक है? So this is what R.S. Sharma said in the beginning. ये इन्होंने मॉडल दिया है. And since the decline of trade had led to the emergence of feudalism, how is the decline of feudalism going to be finally brought about? By the revival of trade. He says that from the 11th century onwards, there was a revival of long distance trade between India and the outside world. And although he does not directly link it to the decline of feudalism, it is implied clearly in this theory. Okay? There was a revival of long distance trade between India and the third historian, D.N.S. यादवा. इन्होंने क्या किया है? He has provided some auxiliary information to further strengthen Sharma's theory of Indian feudalism. ठीक है? So Sharma, in his own hypothesis, had not provided any satisfactory explanation for the decline of India's foreign trade from the 6th century. इन्होंने उसको किससे लिंक किया है? With the beginning of Hunnic invasions from the 5th century onwards as being responsible for the disruption of India's overseas trade. ठीक है? Now, although some historians, especially Marxist historians such as D.D. Kosambi, R.S. Sharma, B.N. Yadava, D.N. Jha, etc., they strongly supported the framework of Indian feudalism. Some non-Marxist historians such as D.C. Sarkar, they challenged the idea of Indian feudalism. क्या आर्ग्यूमेंट किया इन्होंने? That the landed class of India was a simple landlord and not a full-fledged feudal lord, similar to the European feudal lord of the Middle Ages. ठीक है? तो जो इंडिया में सामंताज, महासामंताज ये सब लोग थे, अकॉर्डिंग टू डीसी सरकार, they were no more than ordinary landlords. They were not full-fledged feudal lords. Feudal lords और landlords, ordinary landlords में क्या difference है? Not only, these people acted as a socio-economic as well as political intermediary between the kings and the peasantry. Landlords are simply an economic class. ठीक है? This is simply an economic intermediary. While this was a political class. ठीक है? However, till the late 1970s, no serious challenge could be provided to R.S. Sharma's hypothesis of Indian feudalism, theory of Indian feudalism. It was only in 1979 that another Marxist historian, Harbans Mukhia, provided both an ideological as well as empirical challenge to Sharma's framework of Indian feudalism. Ideologically, he pointed out a problem with the applicability of feudalism as a universal system. ठीक है, तो इन्होंने ये आर्ग्यू किया that feudalism, the idea of feudalism originally emerged in the context of European history, right? But did the conditions for feudalism to emerge as a universal system materially exist during the medieval ages? Could the same system have been developed in India, China, Turkey, Persia, Japan, etc., or were there going to be some major regional variations, right? तो इन्होंने क्या बोला that such universal systems can develop only under the capitalist mode of production. कैपिटलिस्ट मोड ऑफ प्रोडक्शन का बेसिक ड्राइविंग फोर्स क्या होता है? द डिजायर टू व्हाट? मैक्सिमाइज प्रॉफिट. And is there any theoretical limit to the amount of profit that can be accumulated by any single capitalist entity? No limit. Therefore, only under capitalist mode of production can such global systems, can such global phenomena emerge. अब ये बताओ, feudalism associated with capitalist mode of production or pre-capitalist mode of production? Pre-capitalist. Right? And all pre-capitalist modes of production were not driven by the basic driving force of profit maximization, rather by competition over consumption. ठीक है, so maximization of consumption is the basic driving force of all pre-capitalist systems, including feudalism. ठीक है. Now, unlike the objective of profit maximization, which has no theoretical limits, the capability of each and every entity to consume resources has material limitations. ठीक है. So, unlike the capitalist mode of production, pre-capitalist modes of production, including feudalism, can they ever become a global phenomena? And as such, they cannot be a universal system. Is this much clear? Therefore, can the model of European feudalism be exactly copy and pasted over India? नहीं हो सकता. ठीक है, तो it cannot be applied to yeah. अब Harbans Mukhya pointed out that attempts have been made to overcome this problem by arguing in favor of regional variations. ठीक है, कि ठीक है, एक ही सिस्टम हर जगह पे नहीं अप्लाई हो सकता, बट इन एवरी प्लेस वेयर फ्यूडलिज्म इज गोइंग टू बी फाउंड वी विल हैव सम यूनिवर्सल फीचर्स. ठीक है, दैट मच डज हैपन. However, he says that any attempts to compile a list of these regional variations उससे क्या होगा? The basic definition of feudalism that will have to be diluted. ठीक है, will lead to a major dilution of feudalism such that ये definition इतनी ज्यादा diluted हो जाएगी that it is going to lose its basic characteristic. ठीक है, it is going to be entirely unusable and there will be no difference between feudalism and any other pre-capitalist mode of production. ठीक है, so herein lies the ideological problem with Sharma's model. Clear? इतना समझ में आया ना? Empirically, he pointed out ecological, technological and labor structural differences between Western Europe and India. To argue that feudalism as it is applied to Western Europe during the Middle Ages cannot be applied to India at all. Ecologically इन्होंने क्या बोला? Western Europe has a growing season of only 4 months. Only 4 months of sunshine. The method of production was also highly labor intensive. And this is reflected in the abysmal productivity of the land with only 2.5 grains being yielded for every 1 grain that was sown. As a result, for economic success, it was imperative that the landlords, the owners of the land, exercise complete control over the availability of labor. ठीक है, so they encouraged the system of serfdom, or rather I should say they enforced the system of serfdom. wherein the agricultural labor was tied to the estate, to the landed estate, were not able to move out of that estate. Okay. Now, serfdom and intense competition for labor resources, is that going to lead to any social tension or not? Tension hoga between the different classes, the landlords, the feudal lords and the peasants. And to resolve this social tension, kya hoga? Some technological advancements, movements in irrigation, in agricultural technology, all of that is going to happen. Technological advancements would take place, and by the 11th century, productivity would increase substantially to 1:4 from 1:2.5. Okay. So now for every single grain that is being sown, 4 grains are being produced. Because of these technological advancements, expansion of agriculture also takes place, right? What is going to happen to the availability of food? That is going to increase, surplus is going to increase. Because of the rising availability of food, what is going to happen to the population? Population is also going to increase. There was a population explosion, and is labor under the same level of pressure that it was earlier? No. So the competition for labor resources has now come down. So what is going to happen to all this surplus labor? They are no longer required on the fields. Therefore, they can migrate towards the cities, or they can undertake some other work, right? And this is going to lead to the growth of cities. And with the rising urbanization, the economic center of gravity starts to shift away from these estates towards the cities. A commercial revolution is going to start taking place. A new urban elite is going to start emerging. Okay? And feudalism is going to start declining. Okay? However, all of this is going to receive a major shock in the mid 14th century. 1348 to 1351. क्या फैला यूरोप में? एक एपिडेमिक known as the Black Death, which claimed the lives of roughly a quarter of the population. 1/4 of the total population of Europe died. And अभी तक जो surplus labor का availability था, all of that disappeared. And the competition for labor revived, right? तो अब जो feudal class है वो क्या कोशिश करेगा? They will try and impose the same old restrictions on their peasants, on the producer class that existed 200 years before. But by this point of time, over the 11th, 12th and 13th centuries, these peasants have experienced a great degree of freedom, a great degree of prosperity. So are they going to silently accept these old restrictions? They will oppose. What happened as a result? Large scale peasant rebellions are going to take place, and due to these rebellions, the institution of feudalism declined permanently in Europe. Okay? Serfdom became a thing largely of the past. This much clear? तो ये तो सिचुएशन है वेस्टर्न यूरोप में. इन कॉन्ट्रास्ट इंडिया में देखो क्या मामला चल रहा है. इन इंडिया इकोलॉजी कैसा है? लेस फेवरेबल और हाईली फेवरेबल टू एग्रीकल्चर? हाईली फेवरेबल टू एग्रीकल्चर. हैव 10 months of sunshine, an extremely long growing season. We have high temperature and humidity quotient, and thus the upper layer of the soil is a veritable bed of fertility. Therefore, the requirement of deep plowing of the soil is also lower as compared to Western Europe. Further, due to the availability of perennial rivers and their ability to replenish soil fertility by bringing fresh alluvium every year during the flooding season, once again the fertility of the soil is naturally replenished, therefore reducing the requirement for deep plowing of the soil. Further, India also has the Indian humped bull. इसका क्या फायदा है? प्लाउ चलाने के लिए इसके हम्प के ऊपर you can simply affix the plow, right? Whereas in Europe the bull was humpless, right? So using animal power for plowing the soil was or started in Europe much later, from the 11th century on, right? But in India it had been there since the early Christian centuries itself. So once again the requirement of deep plowing of the soil by using manual labor was reduced. इस सबसे क्या देखने के लिए मिल रहा है? That the demand for manual labor was much lesser, and even though it was much lesser, because of the ecological factors, the productivity of Indian soil was higher. तो यूरोप में याद है कितना था? 1:2.5, इंडिया में 1:16, ठीक है। तो अब ये बताओ that because of the large agricultural surplus and the lower demand for labor, what is going to be the level of competition between the classes? Same as in Europe, यहां से कम होगा, कम होगा, राइट। तो competition for labor was less intense as compared to Europe. इंडिया में अगर कंपटीशन होगा भी तो किसके लिए होगा? नॉट लैंड, रादर सरप्लस प्रोडक्शन, ठीक है। तो जितना भी सरप्लस जनरेट हो रहा है वो किसकी जेब में जाना चाहिए? शुड इट गो टू द प्रोड्यूसर और टू द इंटरमीडिएरीज और टू द स्टेट? तो देयर वाज इंटेंस कंपटीशन for surplus produce, ठीक है। अब ये बताओ कि competition for labor had become the cause for which kind of development in Europe? Which advancements? No, टेक्नोलॉजिकल एडवांसमेंट्स टू रिजॉल्व दिस कंपटीशन। टेक्नोलॉजिकल एडवांसमेंट्स हुए थे। अब क्योंकि इंडिया में ये कंपटीशन फॉर लेबर कम है, तो आर वी गोइंग टू सी द सेम लेवल ऑफ टेक्नोलॉजिकल एडवांसमेंट्स? तो द पेस ऑफ टेक्नोलॉजिकल एडवांसमेंट्स वाज मच लोअर। ठीक है। एंड since the pace for technological advancements was much lower in India, are we also going to see the emergence of a capitalist mode of production following the end of feudalism? No, we will not see any emergence of capitalism after the decline of feudalism. यूरोप में तो मर्केंटाइल कैपिटलिज्म इमर्ज हो जाएगा, इंडिया में नहीं होगा, ठीक है। वाई? बिकॉज जो स्टार्टिंग पोजिशंस हैं दोनों सिस्टम्स में वो अलग अलग हैं, राइट। देयरफॉर हरबंस मुखिया प्रोवाइडेड द फर्स्ट सीरियस चैलेंज टू R.S. Sharma's paradigm of Indian feudalism, both ideologically and empirically. Now, although he was a proponent of the Marxist school, D.N. Jha had criticized R.S. Sharma for relying too much on declining trade for explaining Indian feudalism. Okay. And it was due to these challenges from different quarters that R.S. Sharma revised some of his old views and refined his arguments. While providing a vehement and elegant support or defense of his idea of Indian feudalism. Okay? Now, what had he been criticized for? For overly relying on the phenomena of land grants and decline of foreign trade. Andre Wink had called him the Indian Parian. ठीक है, for example. तो R.S. शर्मा ने क्या किया? He now turned towards alternative explanations for Indian feudalism. Now, he pointed to a phenomena of social crisis appearing repeatedly in the literature of the early medieval age. Phenomena को क्या बोला जाता है? कलयुग. Is a phenomena of social crisis, and he explained Indian feudalism in association with this perceived social crisis. Okay? So we are not certain whether this social crisis was real or imagined, but at least it was perceived by the intellectual class. And in order to overcome this crisis, the intellectual class had to be defended, right? And who was the intellectual class of that period? The Brahmins. And how were they to be supported? Through land grants. And land grants became the further medium for feudalism. ठीक है, तो इसको इससे इन्होंने लिंक किया. Now, the idea of Kalyug itself was studied and further expanded by R.S. Sharma's long-term ally D.N.S. यादवा. इन्होंने क्या बताया? That हाँ, इन्हीं के आर्ग्यूमेंट्स हैं, इन्होंने उसको सपोर्ट किया है. ठीक है, कलयुग क्या था और क्यों ऐसा परसीव हुआ. क्या बोला इन्होंने? He said that it is reflected in the decline of Brahmanical domination due to the rise of heterodox sects. He said that this Kalyug was also perceived in terms of the emergence of foreign dynasties the phenomenon of intermixing of वर्णास, वर्ण समकारास, याद है ना? Further, in the form of the rejection of Brahmanical sacrifices, the rising status of Vaishyas and Shudras, the breakdown of the Varnashram Dharma system due to the rising phenomena of Apadharma, the emergence of frequent rebellions, the decline of urbanization, and even natural calamities. So अर्ली क्रिश्चियन सेंचुरीज और अर्ली मेडिवल ईरा का जो लिटरेचर है उसमें ये वाली थीम्स बहुत फ्रीक्वेंट हो जाती हैं, एंड ऑल ऑफ दिस हैज बीन परसीव्ड एज अ कलयुग, अ सोशल क्राइसिस. और इसका रिस्पॉन्स क्या था? द इमर्जेंस ऑफ इंडियन फ्यूडलिज्म. ना क्लियर है? Decline of Brahmanical domination due to the rise of heterodox sects. Yes, but this phenomena became even stronger during the post-Mauryan period, the emergence of Mahayana Buddhism. Okay? Now, during the early 2000s, R.S. Sharma further refined his theory. इन्होंने क्या बोला? That the emergence of bhakti should not be interpreted as it has traditionally been interpreted. Traditionally कैसे interpret किया जा रहा था emergence of bhakti को? As a form of protest against Brahmanical domination, right? Rather, it should be interpreted as an attempt by the Brahmanical system to reassert its dominance. Okay? In fact, according to R.S. Sharma, bhakti was the ideological manifestation of feudalism. It was suited greatly to feudalism. Why? Because it allowed for the peasantization of tribes, the acculturation of the tribals into the Brahmanical society, and encouraged the emotion of blind devotionalism and obedience, not only towards the supreme god but also towards the Brahmanical priests and the beneficiaries of the land grants. Ideological manifestation of feudalism. feudalism से हो क्या रहा था? Expansion of agriculture, right? And as agriculture was expanding, इन areas में expand किया जा रहा था, forest areas, tribal areas में, right? And how did Bhakti allow for the peasantization of the tribes? By assimilation of tribal gods into the mainstream Brahmanical gods, by integration of the tribal cultic systems, the practices into the mainstream religious system. The acculturation of the tribals into the Brahmanical society also took place. That means tribals were not only brought into the mainstream society, they were also given a particular rank within the social hierarchy, right? And it also encouraged the emotion of blind devotionalism and obedience, so that although there is going to be intense tension between the different classes, that tension should not manifest in the form of some rebellion. ठीक है, तो इन्होंने ये आइडिया यहाँ पे बताया. Is this clear? Further, R.S. Sharma also strengthened the idea of Indian feudalism by providing examples of peasant unrest during the early medieval age, right? तो feudalism का एक natural outcome क्या होता है? Peasant unrest, rebellions by peasants, because there is great degree of competition, tension between the different classes. Now earlier he had provided only one example, that is the Kaivarta rebellion in eastern Bengal during the 11th century. But now he provided many more instances of both minor and major peasant rebellion. Thus he further strengthened the idea of Indian feudalism. However, more recently, some other historians have further challenged the very framework of Indian feudalism. What is the biggest weakness of this framework of Indian feudalism? Weakness, model का weakness क्या है? That for the idea of feudalism to exist, something else also must exist. क्या? Relationship है ना between trade and feudalism. तो अगर feudalism high है तो naturally trade low होना चाहिए, right? However, several historians including B.D. Chattopadhyay, Ranbir Chakrabarti, Herman Kulke, Chetan Singh and others have provided solid evidence of trade being revived much earlier than the year 1000 CE in North India. Now, this is the traditional cutoff date for the decline of feudalism as explained by the proponents of Indian feudalism, R.S. Sharma and others. तो इन्होंने क्या बोला है कि ट्रेड तो इसके पहले ही रिवाइव हो चुका था, तो हाउ डज इट एक्सप्लेन द कंटिन्यूएशन ऑफ फ्यूडलिज्म टिल 1000 CE एंड बियॉन्ड. ठीक है. सेकेंडली, अभी मैं लिखवा दूंगा आपको. ठीक है. B.D. Chattopadhyay has also pointed to flourishing cities in the early medieval age, such as Kannauj. Although old cities such as Patliputra had declined, but Kannauj was in a flourishing state. Ranbir Chakrabarti has also poked great hole into the idea of demonetization during the early medieval age by pointing out that although old currency systems may have declined, new ones emerged to replace them, such as the Hadwal coinage, Kalachuri coinage, Gadwal coinage in North India, Kalachuri coinage in Central India, Harikela coinage in Eastern India, etc. John S. Dale, इन्होंने क्या पॉइंट आउट किया है that it is not necessary that only metallic currency should be used as the primary medium of exchange. Right? In fact, any commodity can be used to signify value. For example, a particular length of cloth or a particular length of a particular type of leather or maybe metal powder, kauri, etc. Anything could be used. And it is in this context that Ranbir Chakrabarti has given us incontrovertible proof of the use of kauris for exchange in North India. ठीक है. Further, the very idea that the natural economy is completely different from the or completely dissociated from the money economy has been challenged. ठीक है. नेचुरल इकोनॉमी हम बात कर रहे हैं जो कंप्लीटली फ्यूडल इकोनॉमी है, एन इकोनॉमी कैरेक्टराइज्ड बाय द प्रेजेंस ऑफ लोकल सेल्फ सफिशिएंट एस्टेट्स और विलेजेस. जहां पे all the things that are required they are being produced locally, nothing is being exchanged from outside this region. ठीक है, तो ऐसा हो सकता है? नहीं हो सकता. तो some level of exchange is unavoidable. ठीक है, whether it is for salt or a particular type of cloth or maybe leather or utensils or metals, tools that cannot be produced locally. Even if you look at agriculture, is the soil of every region able to cultivate all type of crops? नहीं, तो कुछ तो exchange करना ही पड़ेगा. ठीक है, at the lower levels of the economy, lower status of the economy, the demand for these external goods may be lower, but as you start moving up this ladder, वो demand अब grow करती जाएगी. क्यों? Because there the capacity of the upper strata of the society to consume goods, that is going to continue. ठीक है, तो even in a feudal setup, money system that is going to be present once. ठीक है, and finally वो जो ऑनरी पेरॉन का डाइकोटमी था ना बिटवीन दिस फ्यूडलिज्म एंड ट्रेड, तो द बेसिक कॉन्ट्रडिक्शन बिटवीन फ्यूडलिज्म एंड ट्रेड is found in Perrine's model. Has now been rejected within European historiography. Historians such as George Dubois, the French historian, they have proved that what was probably considered to be the heyday, the very peak of feudalism in Western Europe during the 8th century AD, in several parts of Europe there was flourishing trade. ठीक है, so if this dichotomy has been rejected in its very place of origin, should it be applied to Indian historiography? नहीं होना चाहिए. So its utility for history as a whole that has now declined. And finally हम conclusion में क्या बोल सकते हैं? That the applicability of Indian feudalism has been challenged and revised over time, and this is reflective of a healthy process of historiographical डेवलपमेंट, ठीक है। हाउएवर, क्या कोई फाइनल ओपिनियन हम दे सकते हैं? नहीं दे सकते। हाउएवर, द डिबेट वेरी मच रिमेन्स ओपन, डिबेट वेरी मच रिमेन्स why maximization of consumption cannot be a universal phenomenon. तो ये जो हर्बंस मुखिया ने पैराडाइम दिया था, जो आइडियोलॉजिकल चैलेंज किया था फ्यूडलिज्म के मॉडल को, उसका पार्ट है व्हाई मैक्सिमाइजेशन ऑफ कंजम्पशन cannot be or cannot be an unlimited process, unlimited this thing, yeah, process. क्यों नहीं हो सकता है? बिकॉज द एबिलिटी ऑफ एनी एंटिटी टू कंज्यूम रिसोर्सेज हैज सम प्रैक्टिकल लिमिटेशंस। तो आप कितना बड़ा घर बना लोगे, कितना खाना खा लोगे, कितना बड़ा आर्मी बना लोगे, कितना बड़ा आप एम्पायर सस्टेन कर सकते हो, दैट इज ऑल गोइंग टू हैव सम प्रैक्टिकल लिमिटेशंस, राइट? However, the amount of money that you can generate as profit, either store as wealth or to further expand production, that has no theoretical limit. That is why according to modern historians, pre-capitalist economies में ये capability ही नहीं थी कि वो universal system को create कर सके. That is what they have said. Now let us quickly write all this down. Give the heading Indian feudalism. देखो the theme of Indian feudalism, the theme of Indian feudalism has experienced, theme of Indian feudalism has experienced rich debate since the 1950s. Since the 1950s. ये वाला तो आपने पोर्शन लिख लिया ना, फ्यूडलिज्म क्या कैसे डिफाइन किया जाता है. हाँ, ये यूरोपियन बैकग्राउंड यहाँ पे लिखने की जरूरत नहीं है. यू विल नॉट गेट एन अपॉर्चुनिटी टू टेल द एग्जामिनर अबाउट दिस, तो इसको मैं स्किप करवा रहा हूँ. फर्दर ये जो कर्नल टॉड वाला जो पुराना आइडिया था, ये ज्यादातर रिजेक्ट कर दिया गया है. ऑल्दो आई एम श्योर कि आप लोगों को ये याद रहेगा, लेकिन इसको भी लिखने की जरूरत नहीं है. हाँ, ये इंपॉर्टेंट हो जाता है, ठीक है. हाउ इट वॉज डिफाइंड फॉर द फर्स्ट टाइम इन द मॉडर्न पीरियड. देखो, feudalism was first expanded upon by Henri Pirenne in the 1920s and 30s in the context of the Middle Ages in Western Europe. The context of the Middle Ages in Western Europe. Up. Next point. He linked feudalism to trade in an inverse relationship. And claimed that the collapse of the grand trade, between Europe, between Western Europe and the Mediterranean due to the expansion of Arab rule during the 7th century CE led to the emergence of feudalism. Led to the emergence of feudalism. Next point. Similarly, as trade revived from the 11th century onwards, due to Arabs being pushed back by the Crusades, Arabs being pushed back by the Crusades, feudalism began declining. Feudalism began declining. Next point. The Marxists were the earliest to investigate the possibility of feudalism in Indian history, the possibility of feudalism in Indian history from the 1950s onwards. Full stop. This was in response to Karl Marx's own Asiatic mode of production and the characterization of India as a changeless society. Characterization of India as a changeless society. ठीक है, इतना पढ़ोगे तो पूरा समझ में आ जाएगा ना. Now give a subheading: development of the debate. Development of the debate. Number 1. E.D. Kosambi explained the emergence of feudalism in a formulaic manner. As the result of a two-way process. Number 1 and 2. Feudalism from above, number 2, feudalism from below. नेक्स्ट पॉइंट लिखो, फ्यूडलिज्म फ्रॉम अबव was the result of state action through the medium of land grants. Medium of land grants. Next point. On the other hand, feudalism from below, as the name suggests, was the result of the emergence of rural elites due to the growth of the local economy. Due to the growth of the local economy. Up the same point continues. These rural elites ultimately inserted themselves into the socio-economic and political structure. ठीक है? This is what D.D. Kausambi had said. On next stage में आर.एस. शर्मा ने जो बोला, देखो आर.एस. शर्मा, further write down. It was left up to R.S. Sharma to expand upon Kaushambi's formula and provide a proper framework to Indian feudalism. Indian feudalism. Next point लिखो. He did this by linking Indian feudalism to land grants and declining trade. But ignored other factors. A point, in other words, while he accepted the idea of feudalism from above, he ignored feudalism from below. Next subpoint. At the same time, he adopted the model of Henri Péron and applied it to Indian history. Henri Péron, P-E-R-I-E-N-N-E, and applied it to Indian history. Next main point. He argued that India's overseas trade declined sharply following the decline of the Gupta Empire. Next point. In this context, he visualized deurbanization, ruralization, and the demonetization of the economy. Up. Next point. These phenomena were linked to the phenomena of rising secular land grants, which contributed to the decentralization of the polity and ultimately to political fragmentation. ठीक है? Next point. From the Sharma further points out that India's contact with the outside world was revived from the 11th century onwards. Implying the decline of Indian feudalism. ठीक है? Next, write down number 3. Sharma's framework of Indian feudalism was supported by other historians, other Marxist historians such as D.N. Jha and B.N.S. Yadava. Subpoint. The latter strengthened Sharma's theory by asserting that the disruption of India's overseas trade was caused by the beginning of Hunnic invasions from the 5th century onwards, was caused by the beginning of Hunnic invasions. यहाँ पे लिखा है Hunnic invasion, हुनास के invasion, Hunnic invasion from the 5th century onwards. Much like यूरोप में भी कुछ ऐसा हुआ था. Arab invasions had caused the decline of overseas trade in the 7th century onwards, है ना? Much like the Arab invasion of Europe in the 7th century. The 7th century. Next, right, number 4. DC Sarkar, who was on the other side of the Marxist fence, DC Sarkar, who was on the other side of the Marxist fence, challenged the idea of Indian feudalism by emphasizing that the Marxist historians had confused the Indian landlord with the European feudal lord. Had confused the Indian landlord with the European feudal lord. While the former was simply an economic intermediary, the latter was a political class. The latter was a political class. Next main point, sorry, number 5. However, the first serious challenge to Sharma's framework came from Harbans Mukhia. Who in 1979 provided an ideological as well as empirical challenge. 79. Who in 1979 provided an ideological as well as empirical challenge to Indian feudalism. Next main point, ideologically he questioned the ability of any pre-capitalist system to emerge as a universal system with inverted commas, emerge as a universal system. Next point. As such, the model of European feudalism could hardly be applied to Indian history. To stop. Conversely, next point करिए. Conversely, even the idea of regional variations to feudalism could not overcome this problem as it would require a substantial dilution of the definition of feudalism. ठीक है. Next point. Empirically, Mukhya compared Western Europe and India on the basis of ecology, technology, and agrarian structure to identify major differences. ठीक है. तो एक एक फीचर मैं नहीं बताने वाला हूं. आई एम ओनली गोइंग टू टॉक अबाउट द एंड प्रोडक्ट. ठीक. राइट डाउन. While the Indian, सब पॉइंट करके लिख. While the Indian society was characterized by a free peasant economy, the European society was characterized by serfdom. सर्फडम एक सिस्टम होता है सेमी स्लेवरी का, जहां पर सम एलिट्स ओन ऑल द इंपॉर्टेंट सोर्सेज ऑफ प्रोडक्शन, दैट इज द एग्रीकल्चरल लैंड, और उसके साथ, उस लैंड के साथ, विच इज द मेन प्रोडक्टिव रिसोर्स, अदर फैक्टर्स ऑफ प्रोडक्शन आर ऑल्सो एसोसिएटेड, अटैच्ड. तो विच अदर मेजर फैक्टर ऑफ प्रोडक्शन? लेबर. तो लेबर भी उसी पीस ऑफ लैंड के साथ अटैच्ड होगा. मान लो एक लैंडलॉर्ड अपना लैंड दूसरे लैंडलॉर्ड को ट्रांसफर करता है, तो उसके साथ उस पर काम करने वाले पेजेंट्स भी ट्रांसफर होते हैं. ठीक है. they do not have the right to leave that piece of pre-peasant economy, while the European was characterized by serfdom. Next sub point. As such, while the European society experienced frequent peasant rebellions, and rapid technological advancements, to reconcile the social tensions arising out of serfdom, which finally resulted in the emergence of the capitalist mode of production as early as the 14th century. Capitalist mode of production as early as the 14th century. When I say capitalist mode of production, ये industrial production नहीं है, mercantile capitalism है, ठीक है? Capitalist mode of production as early as the 14th century, comma, similar changes were not visible in India. Similar changes were not visible in India. Okay? Next, right, number 6. D.N. Jha, a fellow Marxist, also criticized R.S. Sharma for over-reliance on declining trade to explain feudalism, explain Indian feudalism. Number 7. It was in reaction to these challenges and criticisms that R.S. Sharma revised and refined his arguments. Sub point 1, 2, 3, 4 कर click. Number 1. Instead of exclusively focusing upon declining trade, Sharma pointed towards a perceived social crisis from the early Christian centuries onwards, reflected in the contemporary literature. to explain the emergence of feudalism in India. What was this perceived social crisis known as? Kali Yuga. ठीक है? Write down. That is Indian feudalism. That is Kali Yuga, which was further expanded by BNS Yadava to mean एक एक करके ये सब आप लिख सकते हो. The decline of Brahminical domination due to the rise of heterodox sects, foreign invasions and emergence of foreign dynasties, intermixing of varnas, rejection of Brahminical sacrifices, the rising status of Vaishyas and Shudras, the growing phenomena of apadharma, peasant rebellions, declining urbanization, अपधर्मा. अपधर्मा का मतलब हमने कवर किया था दैट कुछ ऐसे प्रोफेशंस जो कि वर्नास ले सकते हैं ड्यूरिंग पीरियड्स ऑफ क्राइसिस, राइट? राइजिंग अपधर्मास, rebellions, decline of urbanization, और भी लिख लो natural calamities such as floods and droughts, etc. ठीक है? That is number 1. पहला काम क्या किया इन्होंने? Looked for an alternative explanation for the emergence of Indian feudalism. इससे जोड़ा इसको to the socio-economic crisis of Kali Yuga. Next, number 2, write. Sharma also reinterpreted bhakti as an ideological manifestation of feudalism, rather than the traditional interpretation as a social protest against Brahmanism. ठीक है? Next, number 3. Sharma also provided more examples of peasant unrest during the early medieval age as compared to earlier. ठीक है? नेक्स्ट मेन पॉइंट लिखो. इन दिस वे, नहीं सेवेंथ में ही एक मेन पॉइंट लिखो. इन दिस वे शर्मा provided a spirited defense to the framework of Indian feudalism. The framework of Indian feudalism. ठीक है? This much clear? Next point write down, or sorry, number 8. Number 7 हुए ना अभी तक? हाँ, तो number 8 write down. The revisionist historians have however further challenged the very basis of Indian feudalism. ठीक है? These historians include, take down these names, B.D. Chattopadhyay, Ranbir Chakrabarty, Harman Kulke, Chetan Singh, etc. अब पॉइंट्स 1 2 3 करके. नंबर 1 लिख लिए, नाम लिख लिए. हरमन कुलके, HERMANN. हरमन कुलके, चेतन सिंह, etc. अब पॉइंट्स करके. नंबर 1, they have proved that trade had started flourishing in North India almost 2 centuries before the traditional date given by the proponents of feudalism for the decline of feudalism. The proponents of feudalism for the decline of feudalism, that is 1000 AD. इससे ऑलमोस्ट 200 साल पहले ही ट्रेड रिवाइव हो गया था नॉर्थ इंडिया. नेक्स्ट सब पॉइंट नंबर 2. Similarly, it has been pointed out that while some cities had declined, others such as Kannauj continued to flourish. Number 3, it has further been emphasized that while old coins may have declined, new currency systems emerged during the early medieval age. Such as Gahadwal, Kalachuri, and Harikela coinage. Such as Gahadwal, Kalachuri, and Harikela coinage. Next, right, number 4. Moreover, it has also been pointed out that metallic currency is not the only medium of exchange. In this context, the use of codis as a medium of exchange in North India has been established during the early medieval age. Number 5. Moreover, the very idea of the dichotomy between feudalism and trade within brackets monetary system close brackets has been questioned. Full stop. It has been emphasized that some level of exchange is unavoidable even in a feudal economy. Last, right, number 6. Finally, the basic contradiction between feudalism and trade has been rejected within European history itself. Rejected within European historiography itself. Thus, it should hardly be imposed on India. Right, conclusion. The debate on Indian feudalism has been a rich and vibrant one. Has been rich and vibrant one. Full stop. However, the understanding of Indian feudalism is constantly evolving. And further research is needed for forming for giving a final verdict. ठीक है? So this is the debate on Indian feudalism. समझ में आया है अलग अलग हिस्टोरियंस के पोजीशंस क्या क्या हैं, अलग अलग हिस्टोरियंस ने क्या क्या चीजें ऐड करी हैं, कैसे उसको डिकंस्ट्रक्ट किया गया है, व्हाट आर द बेसिक पोजीशंस ऑफ द मार्क्सिस्ट हिस्टोरियंस, वो क्लियर है. कैरेक्टरिस्टिक्स ऑफ इंडियन फ्यूडलिज्म अगर पूछा जाता है तो किसका थ्योरी आपको बताना होगा? आर.एस. शर्मा वाला. ठीक है. हाउएवर क्रिटिसिज्म Harbans Mukhya and revisionist history. Now there is a question, why did R.S. Sharma focus upon Brahminical idea Kalyug to explain a universal phenomena? हाँ क्या नहीं, अगर वो फीचर्स ऑफ फ्यूडलिज्म पूछते हैं तो डी कौसाम्बी ने तो केवल एक फॉर्मूला दिया था टू एक्सप्लेन द इमर्जेंस. क्वेश्चन इज, व्हाई डिड R.S. शर्मा फोकस अपॉन अ ब्राह्मणिकल आइडिया दैट इज कलयुग टू एक्सप्लेन अ यूनिवर्सल फिनोमेना? तो फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल जैसा हमने एग्जामिन किया, फ्यूडलिज्म इज नॉट अ यूनिवर्सल फिनोमेना. सेकेंडली, by on the basis of the conclusion and the debate so far, we can also conclude that at best R.S. Sharma was giving the definition of the regional variation in India of feudalism. And thirdly, because Indian feudalism is a phenomena that is generally associated with the early medieval age, which itself is associated with Brahmanism, R.S. Sharma did not have any other option than to search for the ideological basis of feudalism in Brahmanism, right? And that could be done by examining the idea of Kali Yuga. All right. Got it. Any other doubts? Your explanations चाहिए? Thank you then. All right, thank you. चलिए then guys, see you again same time tomorrow. यही अर्ली मेडिवल एज को कंटिन्यू करेंगे, बाकी डिबेट्स को भी और थीम्स को भी.